Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kiwi College. I'm Sarah Smith, the Editorial Director of Kiwi, and I'm so glad you could all join us today for our webinar on natural solutions for cold and flu. Our speaker today is Dr. Lawrence Rosen. He's a regular Kiwi contributor and a leading integrative pediatrician. We're really excited to have him here, and I think we're all going to learn a lot. After his talk, Dr. Rosen will be answering your questions, so please feel free to type them in and send them to us at any time, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. So I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Rosen now, so we can all get ready for this busy cold and flu season.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to everybody that's joining us. And I expect a lot more people who join as the hour goes by. I do hope to give you a sense of, in this cold and flu season, what we do to both help prevent and treat cold and flu from a more natural standpoint. I have my bio here up on the screen so you can see that I do write as a pediatric columnist for Kiwi, which is a wonderful relationship that we have so that we can talk about green pediatric advice, and I write a blog as well monthly. In my day job, I work as a primary care pediatrician at the Whole Child Center in northern New Jersey, and hopefully some of our families will join us today in the call. Also nationally, I work as the chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics section on integrative medicine. For those of you who don't know, through the AAP, we actually do have a section of pediatricians who are very interested in integrative and holistic medicine. And I also serve as a medical advisor to the Deirdre Imus Environmental Health Center at Hackensack University Medical Center. So 'tis the season, and this picture of this unfortunate little girl sneezing reminds us that this time of year we deal with a lot of respiratory illnesses, coughs and wheezes and runny noses, stuffy noses, literally, 20, 30 phone calls or kids coming in the office a day or more in some busier offices. And this is something that we deal with, and I remember early on in my career feeling very frustrated by the conventional options that were out there. Either parents would say, well, it just doesn't work, or they would be worried about the side effects, or giving cold medicines over and over again. And I've discovered through working with many natural health practitioners over the years that there are other options. This is a really interesting poll that Kiwi has done looking at last year and this year complaints about cold and flu season. And Kiwi readers, of course, we have to remember that Kiwi readers are very savvy about natural health alternatives, but that 90% had indicated that someone in their family had a cold. I think that's surprising that it's not close to 100%. And then I guess there are that lucky 10%. And then 40% had flu or H1N1. We also have to remember that last year was a big year, coming from the summer into the fall, about worries about H1N1. This year, readers indicate that over half plan to treat or prevent cold and flu with vitamins and supplements. 37% plan to treat or prevent cold and flu with homeopathic remedies, and 20% plan to treat or prevent cold and flu with herbs. So there are many families out there either planning or using many of these natural remedies, and I think it's important, especially around children, that we discuss what's safe and what's effective. So there was a post, this is from Kiwi's Kiwi Log, written, I believe, last year, but talks about how many people, 35 to 50 million Americans, will come down with the flu alone this season, not to mention other viruses or colds. This is an estimate. Obviously, it's difficult to tell sometimes when you have the flu versus other viral infections, but there are lots of common colds and other respiratory issues, wheezing, asthma exacerbations. So the question is, how do we protect our kids? As I mentioned, there are concerns. You say, well, why even bother with natural remedies? Aren't there cold medicines out there on the shelves? And as we've experienced, sometimes they're really not on the shelves anymore due to recalls, as well as real concerns about safety issues and side effects from use of over-the-counter cold and cough medicines in little kids, especially those under 2. This is from 2 years ago that the FDA first ruled that they thought, especially for children under 2, there really are very few, if any, indications, and that they should be restricted to children over 2. But we have many concerns for kids even older than that, 6 and under, and even for children of all ages, that whether they feel restless or sleepless or overly sleepy or sedated, there can be even more significant side effects. One of the effects of the FDA's concern about cold medicines is recently there was data published that drug-related ER visits, and by that I mean related to medications that were given infants, typically cold medicines, after the cold medicine recalls this year, and after the FDA's rulings and recommendations, we've already seen a 50% drop in ER visits from side effects. So this does matter. And I think what we're seeing is, the truth is, doctor, I've lost faith in Western medicine. So many people are concerned about conventional therapies, yet they would like to help their children feel better. So there are many natural solutions for both colds and flus. We will focus on these 6 here today. There are probably numerous others that we just won't have time to get to. But I would say that first and foremost, we do talk about the need to recognize that symptoms of colds and flus, things like fever and cough, can actually be just signs of a healthy immune system doing what it's supposed to do. And one of the first things we counsel parents is don't be afraid of some of these natural symptoms. Fever, cough are not necessarily evil things. And so tolerating some of that and learning to help your child tolerate that and support the natural immune system may be the best thing to do. Some of those things include lifestyle changes we'll talk about, and those are simple things like nutrition and rest and exercise. The use of water, very simple, fluids. Nutrition, again, and I'll come back to that in more detail. Herbals, essential oils, which are derived from plants and spices in many cases, and homeopathics. So first we'll start with lifestyle issues. And honestly, I think this is about 90% of the battle with many of the conditions that we see. And this cartoon I adapted from one of my colleagues and mentors, Dr. Kathy Kemper, who wrote The Holistic Pediatrician and also recently Mental Health Naturally. She talks about these quadrants of basic lifestyle skills, if you will, focusing on relationships, food, managing stress, and fitness, and taking into account how we interact with the earth in this regard. These are the major things that we can do on a daily basis to prevent illness from developing in the first place. Again, recognizing that some sickness and illness is probably just part of natural immunity. What are these lifestyle issues? They are broken down into 4 groups. The first are communication relationships. And believe it or not, there's a lot of literature about how relationships are protective in many health areas, especially with your immune system. So I put up this graphic to show these relationships. You are here in the middle, but you must cultivate relationships within family, community, country, our planet, and our universe. And a child is in the center of all of this. Many of these relationships and communication can support health. Nutrition, I will, as I mentioned, discuss in much more detail, but very simply put, eat healthy, avoid junk, as Kathy says. It's pretty simple. This is just a blend of different fruits and vegetables. We'll talk about the nutrients contained in these fruits and vegetables to some degree. Vitamin D is hot today in the news, and we'll talk about that, as well as organic foods. But the most important thing to remember is that there's really no substitution for getting your nutrients from food, from good, wholesome, whole food. Fitness. And in fitness, it's not necessarily planned activities. Many of our kids are involved in planned activities, but many really need natural outdoor play. Again, this is in the news today and this week, in that there are national initiatives. And for those of you who read the New York Times, Jane Brody's column today was about getting the dose of outdoor activity, about green spaces, how that can be protective for our health in many ways. This is an example of a prescription for outdoor activity that we can give our patients, just like we give prescriptions for medications. Why not prescribe a visit to a national park near you? Ride a bike, take a walk. Fitness also involves rest. It's the other side of the coin. In rest, hours of sleep, which really can vary from child to child and from person to person. There's not a magic number, but an adequate number of rest in children really does help promote a healthy immune system. And finally, in lifestyle, we talk about stress management. There are key relationships between stress shown through research studies and the development of immune system dysfunction. Emotional stress, mental stress, spiritual stress, all of these things can be experienced and cause significant immune system irregularities. So this is just a picture of our center at the Whole Child Center where we, with our nurse Karen, who's doing yoga classes with kids. Yoga is just one great way to promote stress management coping skills for kids. So let's turn to some more of the specific therapies. I mentioned fluids and water. The use of water actually has its own name called hydrotherapy, which was popularized in the 1800s, and people would literally go to spas to receive water in various forms, some of which are more comfortable than others. But just simply drinking fluids and hydrating, and fluids especially that contain natural sodium chloride, we'll talk about salt in a minute, or natural sugars that help promote, keep the fluid in the blood vessels so that you stay hydrated. The use of water in steam treatments to which you can add essential oils, which we'll also talk about more later, and simply hand washing with soap and water. So I found this funny picture from the show The Office, which I'm not sure is meant to be a neti pot, but this is one use of salt water. We talked about in Good Morning America recently the use of neti pots with Sam Champion, and this little pot of warm water and sea salt. You put a teaspoon or two in there with warm water, and you can literally rinse through all the mucus. We've had kids as young as 2 or 3 do this. There are a few YouTube videos showing how to use it in young children. It can be very effective. Nutrition, as I said, we talk about this in much more detail. Well, even for chickens, you know, this is obviously a play on chicken soup. Nutrition is really an important part of staying healthy. The very interesting study from the University of Nebraska looking at chicken soup, that not only was it important for hydration, it smells good, many people have used it for many years, but it literally inhibits white blood cell. Essentially what it does is help certain white blood cells attack the pathogens or the viruses in the body. And so there is some real physical evidence here about how chicken soup can help us. Organic foods, I think the importance of raising this in this conversation is that organic foods tend to be much richer in their nutritional superiority, that the number of nutrients and antioxidants found in fruits and vegetables, based on the way these foods are harvested and grown, there are higher concentrations which help fight immune system challenges such as colds and flus and help keep you healthy. You also, I'm just going to go back for a second, you also avoid the use of things like pesticides which can damage the immune system. Specific nutrients, again, best obtained through natural foods like the kiwi you see here, are antioxidants such as vitamin A or mixed carotenoids, sweet potatoes, carrots, etc. Vitamin C found in many fruits. Vitamin E or tocopherols found in a variety of fruits and vegetables. And vitamin D, again, hot bit of news this morning. Vitamin D, the level of vitamin D in the body has been associated with respiratory tract infections. So in children, the vitamin D level, the lower you are, the more likely you are to have URIs or upper respiratory infections. The late-breaking news from the Institute of Medicine today, what you'll see all over the media is a question saying, well, too much calcium and vitamin D can be harmful. And that's certainly, as is typical with many of the media reports, that is what many people will take away. Importantly, what came out of the recommendations by the IOM was to increase the recommended daily allowance of vitamin D and calcium for children. So it used to be 200 units. Last year it was raised to 400 units. And now for most children over the age of a year, it's recommended, for under a year it's 400 units still. For over a year it's now recommended that 600 units a day and up to, in some ages, 4,000 units a day may be safer and maybe more effective and certainly seems safe. So you really need to read at least a summary of the report in its entirety. What other nutrient factors? Well, there are omega-3s. I should mention also with vitamin D that the best way is sunlight. So getting outside is another great way to get your vitamin D, especially if you can't tolerate dairy products or you don't want to take a supplement. Essential fatty acids such as omega-3s, which are these long branch chain fatty acids that come predominantly from large northern water oily fish like salmon, are rich sources of omega-3s, as well as vegetable sources or plant sources like flax seeds or oil. And most people can convert the flax to appropriate omega-3s, but not everybody can. So if you are not allergic and able to tolerate fish, that is probably the best source of omega-3s. There are, of course, fish that you can eat. One of the questions with fish is how much is safe given the toxicity of much of our fish source. That toxins such as mercury and PCBs may be found in fish. So it depends if you're pregnant or a young child. You really have to limit your fish intake of those larger fish. And that's where pharmacy-grade screened supplements may come into play, including cod liver oil and others. It's important to note that cod liver oil can contain very high doses of vitamins A and D, which may not be appropriate for all people, but some versions don't. And the idea of food versus supplements really is a conversation to have with your healthcare practitioner. Probiotics are those live bacteria that are healthy bacteria found throughout the body, typically that populate our intestinal tract in our body shortly with birth and after birth. There are certain foods that contain a rich amount of probiotics, which have names like lactobacillus, acidophilus, Saccharomyces boulardii. These are found in cultured foods such as yogurt or kefir. There are, of course, also supplements in many different types and strains. We're not really clear which strains, which type of probiotics are best for which indications. So you will see research that talks about the benefits of probiotics for immune health. And there was a study showing that people who took a daily dose of probiotic or received it in enough colony counts had fewer flus during a lesser rate of flu during the winter season. That was another study that I have listed here. Talks about a specific strain, Lactobacillus GG, in the prevention of both stomach and respiratory tract infections in children at daycare centers, which is a really interesting study to look at kids who are most exposed, and they had a lower rate of both stomach flus and respiratory tract infections. Botanicals and herbals are another class of natural health products we use both for prevention and treatment of colds and flus. Typically, these can be made into teas using herbs. A simple example, chamomile, which is a plant that can be made into a tea, of course. But teas can be made from many herbs, or elixirs, which are extractions of herbs. Sometimes they are extracted using alcohol processes, sometimes with others. And there are blends. The little palette to the left shows a blend of different herbs that you might see commonly in traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicines, which are mixtures of multiple herbs. Echinacea is probably the one many of us first heard about when we thought about herbs for colds and upper respiratory tract infections. It's been studied in Europe for a very long time, probably used historically over thousands of years, at these purple cone flowers that you see on the right. There have been a mixture of studies, some showing, as the Taylor study does up top, that we always thought that giving echinacea historically or anecdotally would help treat cold symptoms, reduce the length of the symptoms, help with symptoms, but not necessarily prevent colds. The Taylor study showed that that was not true in this one large randomized trial, which was criticized in part because of the type of echinacea used or the dosing. Shows you the difficulty of doing these studies. The Weber study below, which actually is the same group of authors, it was the same study group, just different primary authors, actually showed that in the same small study, it helped to prevent colds in children throughout the winter. So it left us very confused in the end. I think that for some people, echinacea can be effective when used sporadically. I don't think it's meant to be used historically throughout an entire season. You do need to be careful if you have hay fever allergies or sensitivity because it can trigger rashes or allergic symptoms. And as well, long-term use has not been studied. Elderberry is something I do use a lot in my practice. It first came to my attention through several studies showing effectiveness in flu treatment, mostly given at the first sign of flu symptoms, aches, fever, etc., seem to reduce the number of symptoms and shorten the course in a statistically significant way. That's the latter study. And then more recent studies looking at the H1N1 strain of flu have found that in vitro, meaning in the lab, not in humans necessarily, that there seems to be a potent effect to help prevent H1N1 infection of the cells in binding to the cells. So there is both lab and some human data to suggest the effectiveness of elderberry. Whether that is true for other viral illnesses really hasn't been specifically studied, although theoretically it should work as well. Andrographis is an herb that's not talked about as much, although the research on Andrographis paniculata, which is known as Calm Care or Calm Cold, Cold Care, Kanjang in Korean medicine. There are a lot of brand names, but Andrographis is the plant name. Very effective for sinusitis particularly, so that 10 to 14 days or more of upper respiratory congestion seems to help the symptoms, not prevention, but treatment. Moving right along, we turn to the use of essential oils, which are very easy to use and especially well tolerated in children. And it seems that these oils are also known as aromatherapy and have been used both topically and in some treatment centers by certain practitioners are ingested. That's not really my area of specialty, and I think you'd really need to work carefully with someone you trust on the internal use of oils, although one can argue that when you make a cup of chamomile tea, you probably are ingesting some of the similar oils. But I would be very wary about the use of these oils internally in children unless you're under very safe supervision with a knowledgeable practitioner. However, the use of oils through breathing or through topical can be very safe. Just keep the bottles away, so that the children can't get to them easily, just like you would with any herb or medication. Eucalyptus is one of my favorite. Some people use eucalyptus for breathing treatment. Some use mint or a variety of things like cedar or fir. But eucalyptus is probably most popularly known as a plant in Australia that koalas and others can eat. But the oil from eucalyptus, and there are many strains of eucalyptus, can be used in different ways. Just a drop or two in a bowl of hot water and just breathe in the steam, or drop it two in a hot bath or shower. Also, there are aromatherapy dispensers that can be used. I don't typically recommend putting all night in a humidifier running all night long, just because the exposure is over many hours. I think it should be more limited. Also, you can take a drop or two and mix it in a massage oil and rub gently on the feet, which is a very non-threatening place, especially in young ones, or behind the ears. The age-old process of using menthol vapor rubs on the chest sometimes can be too overstimulating to the mucous membranes, the nose, the eyes, the mouth, and the respiratory tract, and can actually trigger asthma attacks. So I don't recommend, globbing it all over people's chests, but one of the things these rubs do contain is eucalyptus. So even just using the oil by itself can be effective. I use eucalyptus along with other oils in another way to help prevent infections. And for those that are looking to avoid the use of alcohol-based hand sanitizers, we make our own at the Whole Child Center where I work. And if you go to our website, which is listed here, there's a recipe, actually a little video I did with my kids as well, talking about how to make it. This is a blend based on the popularized Thieves blend, for those of you that know it, which contains eucalyptus, cinnamon, rosemary, clove, and lemon. Sometimes I substitute orange oil for the lemon. I usually use a ratio of about 5 to 1 or 10 to 1, the first 4 oils, just 1 or 2 drops, and then the lemon or orange, I use 5 to 10 drops in a bottle, usually a 2-ounce bottle or even a 4-ounce bottle. Just mixing it with, I usually use filtered water and a teaspoon of aloe just to soften your hands. all of these oils have been shown to be effective antibacterials, antivirals, and antifungals. And just mix it in, swish it up, and put a spray or two in your hand. It smells great. I've even done science fairs or Earth Days with kids where we try other scents instead of lemon or orange, grapefruit, any kind of citrus scent, or lavender if you want, just to help with the smell. But it's really a nice, effective way to avoid the use of alcohol-based hand sanitizers. So let's turn to homeopathy, which is a very controversial therapy in conventional medical circles. And I think a number of the comments that we got after the Good Morning America spot was from physicians who were concerned about homeopathy, that there really is no, their comment was literally, there's really no science behind it. It's hocus pocus. It's it's quackery, and that has been a criticism of homeopathy since the early 1900s. Interestingly, though, if you look at the history of homeopathy, which was developed in the 1800s by Hahnemann in Germany and brought to the U.S., it was a natural, safer alternative to current medicines of the time, which were referred to as barber surgeons, leeching, a lot of other therapies that were much more risky in many ways. And so homeopathy became a way to use natural substances to help with healing. And some of the early evidence of flu epidemics that went through in the 1800s, early 1900s, were effectively controlled with homeopathy in many communities when there really was nothing else to offer. What are homeopathic medicines? They are, as defined by one of the most popular manufacturers of these medicines, they are therapeutically active microdoses of mineral, botanical, and biological substances. So essentially the theory is, and you just have to follow along with me, that if you take a substance that can cause a symptom, classically, think about an onion. If you cut an onion open, it will make your eyes run and watery and your nose watery as if you had allergies. Well, if you take allium cepa, which is onion, and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it many, many, many times so that there may be one or less than one molecule of the active substance still present in the dilution, that is the treatment for seasonal allergic rhinitis in some cases. So it's like cures like, that's the theory. And there's also the law of infinitesimals, which says the more dilute the substance is, the more powerful it is. And many of you may sit here and say, what? How does that possibly make sense? Certainly, you cannot reconcile that with 21st century conventional medicine. And when I first learned about homeopathics in training in medical school, I honestly thought it was crazy. But over time, what I've discovered is two things. One is that there is a solid energetic theory behind the use of homeopathic medicines that, similar to acupuncture, energy healing, the theories of homeopathy are not akin to conventional standard, what we think of as evidence-based medicine in the classic way. And so there's a different mechanism present working that is hard to explain. And so I think if you either buy that or you don't. But aside from that, there are placebo-controlled trials that, on balance, it was a very famous paper published in The Lancet, which is like the New England Journal of Medicine for England, years ago, which really did a meta-analysis of homeopathic studies showing that, on balance, there is an effect above and beyond the placebo effect. And that, to me, represents some scientific data that, and in specific trials, we've also seen the same thing, whether it's homeopathic medicines for childhood diarrhea, for use in a variety of conditions, some of which have to do with respiratory infections and flu. In classical homeopathy, you would go to a homeopath and spend upwards of an hour or two or longer having history taken, many, many questions to try to individualize your remedy or remedies as specifically as you can. There's not one specific remedy for a condition, so it's not like You have a cold, take X, or you have the flu, take Y. So that's in classical homeopathy. There are individualized remedies for each specific person at each specific time. Clinical homeopathy is the use of more generalized remedies, so that you may say, all right, well, I see a number of children or in my family, we have a child who has a cough from a clear runny nose that's lasted, a day or two. There are either single remedies or blends of remedies that one might use that work most of the time in those cases. And I would say that homeopathy is a thing that's fairly easy to learn to do at home on your own because it's so safe. There really are no reported adverse effects. Critics will say that's because it's purely water. Others will say that's because if it works specifically for you, and if it does not, it simply doesn't work. That's the theory of homeopathy. But you can easily adopt a first aid kit of several things. There are blends for cough, for cold, for allergies, for sleep or insomnia that you can certainly feel free to experiment with. Usually I find if they work, and I have been amazed in certain circumstances with rashes that just hadn't gone away over months and months of treatment with conventional remedies, within one day of treatment with a specific homeopathic remedy will disappear. That's when you know you have the right remedy. They typically work pretty quickly if they're going to work. Single remedies include something called pulsatilla, so I show the plant here. So again, remember, it's not an herb. It's not botanical. It's the dilution many, many times. So if you see a 30C, like cat, dilution, that means you've done a 1 in 100. The C is for 100, and if you remember your Roman numerals. 1 in 100 dilution, 1 part in 100 parts of water, done 30 successive times. So that 1 in 100 is then diluted, 1 in 100 diluted, 1 in 100 30 times. So extremely dilute. A pulsatilla is a remedy that is used many times for thick, mucousy congestion, renasal discharge. I may use it in a child who's had congestion going on longer than 7 to 10 days, and again, particularly thick runny nose. And there are other constitutional symptoms we'll look at, but that's one remedy we use for that indication. So again, with upper respiratory tract infections in mind. There are blends as well. This is a blend of a pretty well-known cough syrup, specifically avoiding the use of specific manufacturers here, just to be fair to everyone. But this is a blend, and you can see it contains pulsatilla, but it contains a number of other 3C or 6C, so less diluted and therefore less powerful, perhaps, remedies, which can be mixed with honey or teas or other things to relieve cough. One of the really important things I want to get to is the concept that when we're talking about these remedies for coughs and colds and flus, it's really important to talk with your doctor or your healthcare practitioner, or whoever you see, with your children to talk about the remedies you're using. This is an example of a poster that we have in our office, and it encourages parents to talk to me about the different remedies they might be using, whereas in the past they may have been in offices where they felt uncomfortable using these therapies, or if they do use them, hiding them. Many studies have shown that parents that use natural remedies in these studies are often only 10 to 30% of the time disclose what they're using to their doctor. So this is just a simple nonverbal way. We have a lot of kids who walk in and say, oh, look at that. Those look like the vitamins I take. Or what is that baby? The baby in the middle, they really like the infant massage. And we can talk about herbs and homeopathy and chiropractic and acupuncture. And this is a poster that has actually been endorsed by the American Academy of Pediatrics and other well-known groups. It started in Canada, and it's available to any physician or healthcare practitioner or anybody really who wants it from, I believe, the American Academy of Pediatrics website, or you can certainly contact us and we can let you know where to find it. But I try to show this slide as much as I can whenever we talk about natural remedies, natural does not necessarily mean safe, even though many of us believe that in comparison to prescription medicines or over-the-counter cough and cold medicines, that natural remedies certainly can have fewer adverse effects. There are some that should not be used with children, and it's really important to also understand interactions between herbs and other therapies and herbs and medications. We sometimes have children who are undergoing surgeries, and it's important electively to reduce the use of herbs or supplements that might interfere with bleeding time, for example. And so that's just one example. I did finish up a little bit early to allow plenty of questions, and so I'm just going to turn it back to Sarah for a minute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosen. Before we move on to your questions, everyone, I want to just take a moment to thank our sponsors for this webinar event today. Like Kiwi, these companies all support natural approaches to cold and flu, so we're very, very glad to that we have their support today. So now on to questions from Dr. Rosen. We already have some coming in, so thank you. And everyone else out there, please feel free to send them off. Anytime something comes to your mind. Dr. Rosen, I want to start with a couple of specific, detailed questions about some of the things that you spoke about.
Sure.
So you're speaking about elderberry, and someone asked. She said that she has friends who give their children elderberry all winter. And so would this make it less effective, or is it a good idea to give it regularly?
That's a great question. And, I think elderberry is different than, we talked about elderberry and echinacea. Elderberry is different. It really is the extract of a berry. It's not much different than super concentrated, blueberries, if you will. Even though there's not data, there's no studies showing that giving it all season long is protective, I'm not worried about the use of elderberry long term. I think if you ate elderberries every day, no one would even question that. So taking a bit of syrup every day, for those who feel that it is effective for them in that way, that they get fewer coughs and colds and flus, I would advise to do it, let's say, once a day on a regular basis and increasing it to 3 times a day when they have symptoms. So that would be a way to use it. But I would not be concerned about safety.
Okay, great. So let's see. We had another question about omega-3, back to the nutrition segment, about algae. Is that a good omega-3 source?
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but with the increasing number of vegetarians, people who who want to avoid fish or are concerned about the toxicity of fish, first of all, I would say that the good quality grade fish oils are screened for those toxins. But if you want to avoid fish oils, then algae-sourced omega-3s have become a very reliable source of omega-3s. Now, many of the algae products contain just DHA, and DHA is one specific type of omega-3 fatty acid. Many of the fish oil blends contain EPA and DHA in various ratios. The most common ratio is 3 parts EPA to 2 parts DHA. There's some question about, is DHA the best type of omega-3? Well, just like with probiotics, we don't really know if just DHA is enough. There are people trying to figure that out. If that's your only source or that's what you're most comfortable with, by all means, it's more effective than doing nothing. But these are questions that research just hasn't answered yet.
Oh, interesting. How about when we're talking about babies, children under 1 year, things like elderberry, probiotics, omega? Can you tell us whether that's safe and effective for them?
Sure, and that's an area that, we're, for some reason, well, not just for any reason, but we're always, in pediatrics, very cautious about the youngest kids. Although I think sometimes there's sort of an arbitrary line drawn at 12 months. It's just, it's convenient. There are instances like, I'm just going to throw this out there, like the use of honey. We're careful to stay away from the use of raw honey at the age of 12 months and younger because years ago there were studies showing the risk of botulism spores in the honey is higher in kids under a year. And then at a year it seems safe. Is that true at 11 months and 300 days? I have no idea. But with a lot of these products, whether they're probiotics, elderberry, vitamin D. There, of course, probably are different dosing regimens, but we don't really have data that differentiates. And so it's a long answer. In my practice, I do use some of these. An herb I do use under a year would be elderberry. I also do use chamomile frequently, even in infants. You know, the dose is important. Obviously not giving them too much extra water when they're very little. You want them to nurse or, you know, drink something that's more caloric. But a little bit here and there is safe and effective. You just really want to check with someone who's knowledgeable.
Okay, great. Dr. Rosen, would you mind taking your slides back to the page with the homeopathic blends?
Sure.
We've had a couple of questions, people saying, oh, I want to be sure that I'm able to get this information later, or maybe copy some down now. So I want to let everyone know, actually, that all of our Kiwi College webinars are available at kiwimagonline.com/college, and this one will be there soon as well. So you'll be able to get it there then. But why don't we, but since we have Dr. Rosen right here now, it would be great. We can put it there.
Sarah, was this the slide, you think?
I think that's the one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something, look, you can recreate this if you want at home, but I would say if you're looking for a blend of a cough syrup, they exist this way. Again, this will be posted, but these are just examples. You know, sometimes you look at this and say, well, it's a dry cough, but it's a little phlegmy at this time, and you're trying to match symptoms. It can be difficult, but you can look at individual remedies and try them as well, or work with a classical homeopath who can help you with this, or if there's a clinical homeopath in a practice near you. I showed pulsatilla as one example, but there really are multiple blends, and this is just one example.
Great. And, you know, we've actually had a couple questions also about pregnant women, if these homeopathic blends are safe for them to use, or if there's any particular warnings that we should be aware of.
Well, you know, that's also a special population that we want to be careful about the use of, not so much homeopathics. I really do believe that homeopathics should theoretically be safe during all stages of pregnancy, given that there really are no known adverse effects. Has it been specifically studied in that group? Not that I know of. It may have been for specific conditions, but really not in any well-published way. Herbals we have to be pretty careful about. So there are herbs that are safe to use, for example, after pregnancy and during nursing, but not during pregnancy. That would be something that you really want to check carefully with a skilled herbalist or naturopath or a physician who knows a lot about herbal medicines. Again, food-based things like elderberry really shouldn't pose a risk, but some of the herbals that we talked about I would be careful about.
Okay, great. That's helpful. We also have a question about your opinion on flu shots. I know this is a very big issue that you and I have talked about, and you've addressed in Kiwi, or that will be coming out soon in Kiwi. So you know, I'd love if you could speak to that a little bit to this audience.
Sure. I figured this talk could not go by.
Yeah, and also I know, and I'm sure all these people, all of our listeners know that it's not always the most black and white answer.
Right. Well, that's a good point you make, which is, you know, for me, the question of flu shots for kids is not a simple, you know, yes or no kind of thing, although if you look at a lot of conventional sources of information, I have to say, really the party line from the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics is that all ages of people should get a flu shot every year. Those are the recommendations. And so what I am saying, you know, may not be the standard of care in your area. That being said, I really try to come at this from my own perspective and from a very scientific, evidence-based perspective. And I've had these discussions with other pediatricians, including infectious disease experts. And in the end, I think, you know, we're going to have to agree to disagree. I do not believe that the data, especially for children under 2, supports the universal recommendation for flu vaccines for kids. If you look at the best, most well-done analyses of the data, the Cochrane Database Review, which is universally accepted as really the most conservative academic review board, they call into question the lack of data for flu vaccines, both the safety and effectiveness in kids under 2. That concerns me, especially in the state of New Jersey, where there is a mandate now that all children in preschool and daycare under the age of 5 need to receive a flu vaccine. The other thing that concerns me is much of the flu vaccine supply, despite the controversy about the use of thimerosal and mercury-based preservatives, most of the vaccines, greater than half, still contain significant amounts of thimerosal. That is something you need to know if you are getting a flu vaccine, especially if you're pregnant or for your children, that there may be up to 25 micrograms of thimerosal per shot. And that dose, based on the EPA's own guidelines of mercury exposure, is excessive. And so I would be very careful about that. For the use in kids over 2, if you have a child at high risk with severe asthma, who's at high risk from flu, I think that most pediatricians would say that weighing the risks and benefits, unless there's an egg allergy, which is a contraindication for most people for flu vaccines, that they would recommend the flu vaccine for those kids at high risk with immune conditions or respiratory conditions underlying. But for the generally healthy child, I am still not convinced that all children need a flu vaccine, and I think that should be really something decided based on a discussion between the parents and the pediatrician.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. That's very, gives us all food for thought. I appreciate that. So let's see. Let's jump to another real specific question, if that's all right with you, about when you're talking about eucalyptus oil. So we hear from someone who sounds like she wants to use it. How do we do it? What ratio should you put eucalyptus oil in with water? And can you just tell us a little bit more about
Sure.
How to do it?
If you're talking about using it to breathe as an aromatherapy, what you can simply do is take either a cup or a bowl of hot water and just put 1 or 2 drops of the essential oil. The oil comes in a little bottle, contains hundreds of drops, and when you turn it upside down, it's oily, so a drop will come out at a time. And you can put 1 or 2 or 3 drops, just a few drops, literally that's it, and you'll smell it right away. And that's really all you need to use. If you're using it in a bath, again, probably under 5 drops is sufficient. If you're using it topically in a base oil, what you'll do is you'll get a massage oil, a grape seed or sesame seed, and remember it could be olive oil, canola oil, organic canola oil, and there are many choices of oils, whatever you like. Some have smells, some don't. You take a handful of oil, like you would just a tablespoon, let's say, and in that mix in a drop or 2 of eucalyptus oil, rub it together in your hands, and place it. If you're with children, again, avoiding the area just under the chin and the chest. For some kids, they like that, but I typically think it's too irritating. I do it, a little bit on the feet, a little bit behind the ears. You can even massage. When you get a cold, often you get congested, and so the lymph nodes can swell under the chin and those what we call cervical lymph nodes. You can actually massage those lymph nodes if they're not too tender to help reduce congestion. Just down the angle of the jaw, down into the neck, and then back behind the ear. There are 2 lymph chains that go, one in front, one behind the neck, to help improve drainage. This is something frequently done by either chiropractor, massage therapist, osteopathic, manipulative therapy practitioner, craniosacral practitioner, and these massages, so you can use it that way as well.
Okay, great. I also want to share with everyone that one of our listeners wrote in to say that she recommends a book called Smart Medicine for a Healthier Child by Janet Zand. I don't know if you know that book, Dr. Rosen, but she says that it blends conventional medicine tips and some of the natural remedies that
that is a great resource
Wonderful.
For those looking for home care, and it's one of the ones we actually talk about on our website, too.
Wonderful. And that actually brings me to another question we had from someone who wants to know if there's somewhere that you'd recommend to find a list of recipes for making our own cold and flu remedies from natural sources. If she sees some things online but not sure which are the best. I don't know if there's some in that book or if you have other resources that you might be able to recommend.
There are in that book. Also, I mentioned Kathy Kemper's book, The Holistic Pediatrician. I think that it's hard in this day and age where there's so many sources of information, it is hard to call out what are the safest, what are the most effective, and maybe Kiwi needs to make its own book.
It sounds like it. It sounds like there'd be a lot of people interested. I'm glad.
I think so.
Okay. So let's see. We have just a couple more questions that are specific to some people's individual situations. But since we have a couple minutes, I think we'll go ahead and see if you can answer them for these folks. One of our listeners has a son who grinds his teeth at night, and she's used Rescue Remedy for Bach, and it seems to help somewhat. And is there something else she can do, or should she see someone about this, do you think?
Well, Bach flower remedies are a whole other offshoot of botanical medicine, which it's sort of its own line of therapies that you'll see in health food stores. And they're blends, and the most famous of that is called Rescue Remedy. And it's in a little bottle with a little dropper. And some people consider it homeopathic. Some of the dilutions are. Some of the dilutions may be closer to herbals, just depending on the dilution. But Rescue Remedy is considered to be safe for even young children. I would say, certainly over a year. You can use, half the number of drops for a child 6 to 12, and a quarter of the number of drops for a child 3 to 6, and then, a drop or two for kids, a year to 3 years old. This blend seems to be particularly helpful for anxiety or stressful situations, so after there's been a traumatic event, or with going to sleep, which can be made more difficult by anxiety or stress. In addition to Rescue Remedy, one of the other things I like to recommend is chamomile tea. As Peter Rabbit's mom famously used when he had a really rough day in the McGregor garden over there. He came home and his mom gave him some chamomile tea, and that seems to really be a safe, calming herb that can be used even for babies.
Okay, great. And then we have a question about someone who's breastfeeding and she was wondering earlier if using homeopathic hemorrhoid solution was a good idea, and wanted to know if that's the case, and if not, is there something else that would be safe for breastfeeding?
I think for people that are breastfeeding in general, we don't have concerns about homeopathics. Came up recently with arnica, which is a homeopathic remedy for bruises or healing, which is used after trauma, let's say, and it comes in both tablets and a gel or an ointment. True homeopathic arnica, which is extremely diluted, is safe, or other homeopathics would be safe during nursing. But be careful that there's a distinction, again, between homeopathy and herbal. Herbals are generally undiluted or mildly diluted, and those may not be safe, or may be safe, just depending on what they are.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. And we have a question, someone we could repeat the name of the books we mentioned. So one of them was Smart Medicine for a Healthier Child by Janet Zand. And Dr. Rosen, could you mention the other one that you mentioned by Kathy Kemper?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Kathy Kemper, K-E-M-P-E-R. It's called The Holistic Pediatrician.
Great. Thank you. So sounds like great resources. Okay, one more quick one. Someone who says that she uses tea tree oil in the bath with her child who's 5, but they often find a slight burning. Is that harmful? Is that something to worry about?
Burning, I guess it would depend on where the burning is. If it's on the skin, I would say really oil shouldn't burn. Tea tree oil smells a lot. It's pungent, almost like a mint would be. Mm-hmm. And some people do use it for respiratory reasons. It's a very powerful antifungal as well, an antiviral. So I have used it topically on toenails or fingernails with fungus or rashes. But if there is skin irritation already, it can burn. And in those cases, I would not use it. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, that about wraps up our time, everyone. And thank you all so much for those great questions. That was really interesting stuff to hear. And Dr. Rosen, I really can't thank you enough for this wonderful presentation and this helpful information for all of us as we try to stay healthy.
Yeah, my pleasure, and happy to take part.
Great, thank you. So everyone, don't forget, kiwimagonline.com/college is where all of our webinars live and where this one will be posted again soon, so you can catch up on anything that you might have missed. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.